I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions if you have that. But Dan, I'll give you the last word as people are gathering their thoughts and getting in line.
Well, my last word is beware of pernicious effects.
Meaning?
Meaning that I've worked in governments out west, national governments, and the Quebec government, the Ontario government, and there's good intention, and then there's the effects of sometimes good intention or bad policy being legislated on the backs of good intentions. And it's maybe a complex notion, but there's nothing that I've seen in the field of public policy that dictates that a carbon tax and a carbon market cannot go hand in hand. The issue is how you put it in place and how you operationalize it and what you do with the benefits of those taxes. And so you have to look not only in the dialogue, as Graham mentions and others have mentioned, on the specifics, but you have to look at the operationalization of those policies and regulations. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself with some surprises down the road.
Thank you. Could we have the lights up a little bit, but could we go to microphone 2, please?
Thank you very much. I'm Nina Goodrich, formerly the Director of Sustainability with Alcan Packaging. And my question, I recently heard John Rapogle, the CEO of Burt's Bees, speak, where he said that in the top 100 economies of the world, 51 of them were businesses versus countries. And so the question that I have for the panel, is the role of business changing in terms of the responsibility for sustainability based on the fact that business has the money, the resources, the infrastructure, and spans the boundaries of countries? I'd like to hear the panelists' comments on that.
That's a great question. Who'd like to take the first shot at that?
Well, we at Interface,
Can you?
At Interface, we've always
taken. Can we have Dan's mic up?
At Interface, we've always taken the position that the industry got us in this mess, and industry is really the only organization that can get us out of this mess. I mean, government can play a role, but I think industry has to reinvent itself. They've got to take the sustainability message to their employees. They've got to energize them at a higher purpose. And I do believe that businesses will be rewarded in the marketplace for being more sustainable. But I don't believe governments can get us out of this. I mean, we've been talking about all the pitfalls with government and beware. But you as a consumer have to take it to the industries as well. But I agree that the top 51 economies are companies. There's no question that that's who's going to get us out of this. And that's where the innovation is going to come from. And that's where the acceleration is going to come from about emissions.
David?
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think that we have the opportunity to be fast movers on things, faster than government can move on policy. In fact, a lot of government policy seems to follow public sentiment, which follows, media, which follows, maybe things that are totally unrelated to the real issues of the day. So if we want to avoid sort of being the tail that gets covered with blanket approaches to things, then we've got to step up and provide leadership that can demonstrate a difference. And I think that's a global phenomenon today. I think you're seeing a major shift globally. You hear more about sustainability now in the last year than you've ever heard about it. And if you see people around the world who do have economic power and influence, you see them really focused on addressing the global problems of the day. We've got the baby boom generation is coming to the point in their lives where they've accumulated a tremendous amount of wealth. They've had a lot of experience. We live in the world of internet instant connectivity, so we know what the challenges are out there. So I think there's a higher expectation and a higher need amongst us individually to be making a difference. So I think that the private sector is kind of a melting pot for that kind of thinking, and we should be stepping up.
No. Gentlemen, get ready. Microphone 3. Diana, this should be a good one.
Well, it centers around a similar point. There's not complete agreement on whether it's 49 or 51. But first I want to say, you mentioned REDD was, that REDD had come together quickly. And I would just suggest that, well, it came together quickly in terms of COP15, but if you look at the Earth Summit itself in '92, where you first started with the forest
Sure.
principles, if you look at WSSD in 2002, where the thrust on forest was really critical in terms of that, it's quickly known as 18 years.
Right.
So-
Well, Diana, there's this open question about what is the cycle to actually get it to, because it was the only thing that really matured fully to a detailed agreement.
Well,
And
yeah.
let's hope it's not 18 years, because we're,
Well, we're already at 18 years. So the thing I wanted to say is, and to ask and put forward is, I happen to use the statistics that only 49 countries are left in the top 100 economies. California is number 9, so you have some states, you have some city-states and some of that. But clearly, what has been missing from the table, and to his credit, Ban Ki-moon has even said this himself, and is trying to figure out, how do we figure out a way to have the private sector at the decision-making table? And the piece that I wanted to put into this is, with all due respect to Ivo de Boer, who has now announced he's stepping down as the operational head of this, I really missed Yoko Vala Hunter, who was the woman who passed away before that, because she really always acknowledged that she thought the real flaw with Kyoto was that it was, in fact, only the Annex I countries, whereas we already knew in '92 the reality of the arc of what was going on with the G27, which was already 128 at that time. And so we've just got some fundamental structural pieces that are missing each other. And so I really wanted to underscore David's points in terms of, if we don't figure out how do we use the private sector, address the fundamental inequities of poverty, and put new definitions to the language and the labels that we've been using. I guess I've been saying, instead of moving the pieces around on the chessboard itself is morphing, and there are new values there. And if you look at who was in that room at 5:30 in the morning
yes.
on the last day, the countries that were sitting at that table, I mean, Europe was basically missing from that small room. So I'd ask back to the panel, how do you feel about that? Because we've still got a clock of 2012 when Kyoto expires, and we need something else to replace it. And I just don't see that happening at Cancun right now.
Dan?
Well, I agree. But I agree for the following reason. I've lived through attempts by the private sector to make a more meaningful contribution. In other words, to be actually in the room when something is happening. And the answer has been a resounding no. And I'm not talking about the private sector being there to lobby. I'm talking about people who are heads of large corporations who have a proven track record. Being there in point of fact to, not just as observers, but perhaps to advise the participants. And this is a jurisdictional issue, I think, with governments who feel that if they do that, then they have to let everybody into the room. You know, they have enough problems. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that somewhere between now and 2012, there's going to have to be new channels of communication to take from the private sector the best of what it has to offer and to use it creatively to innovate. Governments do some things right. You know, the government of Canada set up this Sustainable Development Technology Council. And for my sins, I agreed to go on the board. And it's been an education, because although that's venture capital and it's not big business, it's a success. You know, for the $500 million that you put into these efforts with an arm's length board, you generate about $3 billion of innovation. Now, they're not all successful. You know, you can't expect in any business proposition that everything's going to succeed, but it's a success. And immediately when I left my first board meeting, I went, uh-oh, governments have a successful story, but then they look for the next announcement. So when are they going to cut the STDC and go on to something else? So we have to be able to, as a private sector, to bring these lessons to government and to reinforce the fact that when something really leads to the desired outcome, incentive or performance, that we consistently back it, that we do in business, no, you would do a value for money type of equation, and you'd look at what you're actually getting for the time and the investment you put into it. And if it works, God damn it, you're successful. Keep going. Don't drop it and go on to something else. So I think we have a big challenge as business to make sure that that dialogue includes new channels of involvement, new ways to participate. Because if we don't manage that, we'll just keep making going around in circles, making the same mistakes.
Graham.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to reinforce that and also to agree your analysis. Who was in the room was really important, I think. And that's a reset moment, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And this is not to argue that KP hasn't been valuable, it has. But it is to note that it needs to get changed, that the folk who need to participate are different from the folk who are in Annex 1. So, given that that's so, that's the opportunity of the Accord, because it gets the 80% of the folk with 80% of the emissions into a practical process which says we can do some stuff here. But it doesn't address the issue of equity. And actually, from a political point of view, the matter of equity needs resolve before the practical actions can occur.
Sure.
So who is to take up that challenge? And then the second bit is this redefining of channels. Yeah. So that those who have to undertake the task, business, have the opportunity to be part of how we decide to do this in a transparent and open way, I think is also critical.
Yes, and I mean, as if to underline your point, it was fascinating to me in Copenhagen that the IEA released the study that said $10.5 trillion was required by 2030 to transform energy infrastructure, and that 80% of it was going to come from business, and yet there was no corresponding conversation about what were the tools that would be required to actually incent 80% of that investment coming from business.